Welcome, everybody. This is the SharePoint Community Call. It is May 2021. It is May 11th, 2021. Spring is coming. It's at Helsinki. It is actually pretty much the first day of the summer. It's above 20 Celsius, which is a decent temperature actually for Finland at this time of the year. My name is Vesa Juvonen. You can guess that I'm based in Finland. I'm a program manager in the Microsoft 365 platform team, doing a lot of stuff together with things. Now, let's actually get moving on today's agenda. We'll have a few slides and a few updates first, like typically. So we're going to talk about the latest on SharePoint framework, some acknowledgement of community contributors within the past month, and then we're going to do a picture time and optional picture time if you're willing to do that. And then the main topic of today, we'll have like 40 minutes on that one, is the SharePoint Syntex. We'll get to that like 15:15 or 20 past on the hour, hopefully 15:15. And the main speakers on that one will be Son Squires, James Eccles, and then Bert Janssen. It's going to be a really interesting discussion related on SharePoint Syntex, so latest on that one, and also some of the platform capabilities, which is actually pretty cool as well. So there is API support for SharePoint Syntex, but you'll hear more about that one later on in this call. Quick kind of a recap on our general slide, which we're always keeping on these presentations, just to recap on different assets which we have available. I'm going to just jump through this slide really quickly, which is that the last URL, which is AKMS M365 PnP, is the one URL to remember. Everything else is kind of a bypass extra URLs. But from that one URL, you can then find the YouTube channels, open source assets, sample galleries, which, by the way, we're right now testing a really cool unified Microsoft 365 sample gallery. So we're going to combine the sample galleries to one within upcoming weeks. Hopefully, we'll get all of the bugs fixing on that one. So it will make it easier for you to find the relevant sample as you start building something for you or for your customer or your company in the Microsoft 365 area. Now, a few updates since the last monthly call. It's actually, there's so much happening that it's less than 2 weeks actually when we announced the SharePoint Framework 1.12.1. So finally, that was slightly delayed based on our initial plan, but we did a public preview and testing and for the quality assurance perspective on that, and that went live within 2 weeks ago, or roughly 2 weeks ago. And it's really targeted on more and more for the Microsoft Teams and updates on the technical dependencies like the Node.js version 14 and so on. We will be targeting more and more obviously Microsoft Teams in the SharePoint framework in the future as well, not forgetting about the Viva connection story, which is really cool as well, and not forgetting about portals and modern pages in SharePoint. So all of this is part of the SharePoint framework kind of areas where we are investing. Now, related on that one, we just want to recap AKMS SPFx web part. So if you're looking into getting started on SharePoint framework, which is the future-proven way of doing SharePoint extensibility, I think it's fair to say don't use SharePoint add-ins. It's not a future-proven way of doing things. We haven't invested on SharePoint add-ins for many years. So SharePoint framework is the way to do it. AKMS SPFx web parts is the easiest way to get samples. There's more than 200 or 300 samples already in this gallery, and sooner or later they're going to be merged on that one unified sample gallery. The one other thing which I wanted to call out, typical slides in these sessions as well, is the new Microsoft 365 Extensibility Lookbook Gallery. So if you are not familiar of all of the different options to extend Microsoft 365, that is a great place to get started. So you can actually have a look on the different extensibility options. You can see different extensibility options in Teams or in SharePoint or in OneDrive or in Office or in Power Automate and so on. So you can actually understand where to get started. You'll see some video links, pictures and stories, and then you will be redirected to the documentation. It is actually really cool portal, at least from my perspective. Now, other things, we wanted to still remind you that we have this new Microsoft 365 PnP Community Hub in the Microsoft Tech Communities led by Louise Fries. I can see her on the call as well. Thank you, Louise. And there's more than 200,000 views already in this blog, so it's catching on really well. So we are moving all of our community blog posts, community call recordings, and all of that stuff to this one particular location. It makes it easier for you to stay up to date from a community perspective, what's actually happening. And then we keep official Microsoft 365, Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and so on announcements in the developer portal. kind of making it clear that what is community, what is actually non-community stuff. But clearly people are finding this, which is really, really cool. And there's a lot of articles which are actually in the top 10 most viewed articles in the whole tech community already in this blog. So really, really good numbers in some of the articles. I just want to call out Yannick Reekman's absolutely brilliant article, which is, I think that's in the top 8 right now in the past 2 months or whatever in the overall tech community. So really, really cool stuff in this blog as well. The next one, related on this one, I will actually throw it to David, so you can recap on what sharing is caring is all about and how does that relate on the tech community.
Absolutely. Thanks, Vesa. Well, just in the few amount of slides we've seen so far, you know there's a ton of resources available to you as community members. But we understand that using and, of course, contributing back can sometimes be a little full of hurdles, right? You're not quite sure how to use GitHub. For example, tech community, would you like to blog there? Not quite sure how. Sharing is Caring is an initiative that's going to provide hands-on guidance on a number of topics. You can see the spectrum of topics is wide, from first-time contributor to M365 maturity model practitioners, first-time presenter, using VS Code for not code, a lot of opportunities, and we want you to get more involved, but we want to help you. So these sessions are free, safe space, inclusive opportunities. They are not recorded, so you can feel free to ask any question without feeling overwhelmed of, well, is this not the right question? Is it going to get recorded? We want everyone to join these sessions completely free, scheduled throughout the month with more coming. In fact, as Vesa mentioned, right after this call is an Ask Me Anything event on the tech community where Luis will be our guest of honor, and she is going to talk about all the opportunities everyone has to contribute to the community and take advantage of blogging there at the tech community. So aka.ms/sharing is caring. Hope to see you soon. Vesa, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, David, on that one. These are really, really getting huge positive feedback from the community. So please join and keep us up to date. So also keep on providing us the feedback, what works, what doesn't work, so we know what do you need. Because all of these things like sharing is caring is for you to take advantage. Now, a few additional assets as well. So PnP Weekly is our podcast, which we are recording on a weekly basis, and there's quite a few of them. We released episode 126 today, together with Darcy Hess on discussion on her career and I think in the UX design implications in the Microsoft 365. So really interesting discussion, and we've been having recently quite a few different MVPs in the different areas to have a discussion related on a Microsoft 365 platform. If you're more interested on a deep dive on the developer topics, then Microsoft 365 Developer Podcast is probably the one which you would be looking into. And that typically has also weekly or bi-weekly episodes hosted by Paul Schaffelin from Adding 365 and then Jeremy Fake from Microsoft. Few other updates from Microsoft side. So user voice on SharePoint, and no actually updates in the top 10 on this one. There are work being done on the number 1 for sure, and many of the other things as well. I can't actually provide you an exact timelines, but for example, enabling the renaming of SharePoint Online tenant domain is actively being worked on. We talked about that one quite a few times in our monthly calls, but it is coming because we know that there's a lot of customers who are looking into doing that. Now, in general, related on user voice, the user voice will be retiring, or Microsoft will be moving away from the user voice platform by end of this calendar year. So for as an example, for SharePoint user voice, we're still keeping and collecting the input in the existing location. And then whenever the transition will happen, we will take the votes and the insights and the titles and descriptions with us to the new platform, which is going to be available later this year. On the platform side of the house, we did do some cleaning in here together with our API leads, and API meaning the application, well, developer API leads, where we basically went through a lot of the CSAM API and REST API requests. And bluntly, we closed all of those where we are not looking investing within the upcoming year or within a year or 2 years. So basically, that's the reason why there's 3 new items in this top 10 list, and we did close quite a lot of CSAM items in the list as well. The number 3 is growing, so it's getting additional votes. That's good that we're getting those votes because it's an indication for the on-premises team potentially on investing there. I can't promise that we'll have a .NET Standard APIs or .NET Standard CSUN package for SharePoint 2016 or SharePoint 2019, but more votes always impacts something. The number one item on this list, by the way, is actively being reviewed as part of our planning schedule in the roadmap. Unfortunately, right now, for example, it's not being worked on, but it's being actively again looked for the autumn timeframe. So potentially we'll get to that. It is something which we want to do for sure. The question is just on when do we have the resources to make that request happen. And same as with the other user voice statement, so we're moving away from the developer votes and developer user voice way to the new first-party solution later this year. Quick recap also on the SPFx, the future platform features. Just a recap in here, we'll have a session around the SharePoint framework in build. Jeff Deeper is going to touch some of the areas on these topics as well. As we talked in the past as well, Microsoft Viva connections and Microsoft Viva in general is a big investment area for us from a ODSP, meaning OneDrive and SharePoint perspective. Teams improvements is a big priority for us as well. So we want to make sure that the SharePoint framework is the easiest way to build enterprise solutions for Microsoft Teams. And it is already that today, because you don't actually need to have any external hosting. You just write your solution and make it hosted directly from SharePoint, even though you would be exposing that directly in Teams. So we're investing heavily there as well. We're also looking into investing on a Microsoft Teams toolkit. So there's a additional announcements coming up on that in the build, which is on 25th to 27th of May, so 2 weeks from now. So we'll get additional announcements on those from a end-to-end improvement perspective. And then store modernization is being actively worked on. It is actually right now already in our eDoc, meaning our preview environment internally for testing, and that's going to get out sooner or later. Now, related on the updates as well, earlier today we released a Microsoft 365 Community May 2021 update, and that's basically listing all of the contributors and companies who've been involved on contributing within the past month. Kind of a typical monthly summary where we walk through all of the different news samples, videos, news articles, blog posts, and contributors in all of our different areas. And a lot of people, once again, were helping us on this community to succeed together. So thank you for everybody who've been actively involved within the past month. I think we are hitting more than, I didn't calculate this, but I can estimate that it's 250 external and roughly 50 internal Microsoft employees who've been actively helping other people to succeed in the community. So this is from A to K, and then from K to C is the full list in here. I needed to even adjust again the font slightly to make all of the people listed on the slide. So thank you for being part of this community and helping others to succeed as well. And please let us know if we can help you any other ways. And that's really important. So please let Louis Fries or let any other PnP team member, crew member to help on this journey. We are here for you to succeed in the Microsoft 365 platform. Now, this is also the list of companies which we have permission to show their logo. From the previous mentioned people are working in these companies, and this is actually the all-time highest number of company logos in the slide, which is really awesome. So people are letting, and companies are letting their employees officially to work in the open source and helping others to succeed as well. So thank you for that one. If your logo is not here, but you were mentioned on the previous slides, or you're planning to contribute in the future, you will need to explicitly give a permission to show the logo in our communications. So, and that can be done by sending a message directly to me or somebody else in the PnP crew, and then we'll sort it out. Now, on the Microsoft side, we have a kind of a typical group of people. It is growing, well, growing and not growing, but there's a lot of people involved in the document side of the house, but then also a lot of people involved in contributing on the samples and driving the community and coordinating the community efforts as well. Now, before we go to the demos of today, let's do a quick group photo, and I will actually need to start my recording tooling here, and I will set everybody to the together mode, and I will get you tracked on the screen so you can actually see what I will recording. Excellent. So I'm not going to risk it. I'm not going to change the scene this time. So we're going to use this scene. I'm going to start the recording, but we'll fill in 50 first persons enabling the video, and we'll get to the screen. And I think we hit the max. That was super fast. Thank you, everybody. So let's do some hand waving. Thank you, everybody, for everybody in the community. We're going to share this picture and a GIF animation again in the social media and as part of the blog post. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for seeing the real faces of the people behind of the names. Thank you, thank you, thank you. A lot of familiar faces again. Thank you. Thanks for that. Cool. Let's get in here, and then we'll get to the real stars of the day. So I'm just the warm-up today, and the real stars are Sean Squires, James Eccles, and then Bert Janssen. Who's going to start, Sean?
I think I'm going to kick us off, Vesa.
Cool.
Thank you for your time and the opportunity to come chat with you about one of my favorite products right now. I've been working on SharePoint Syntex for the last couple of years, and I'm very excited to share with you, just for those of you who are new to it, what it is very briefly, and then we'll get to some live demos so you can actually see what it is, but also give you some updates, because ever since we released it, we have continued to develop and provide updates. And in fact, we have some more coming later this month that I'll touch on in just a few minutes. So SharePoint Syntex is a new add-on for those who aren't familiar with it that we announced at last fall's Ignite. And by add-on, meaning you have to have SharePoint, and then this is something that you can add to your tenant to add additional content service functionality. And the way we think about SharePoint, SharePoint is already a content, a market leader in content services. But what Syntex does is it really builds on a lot of the powerful content management capabilities we provide in the product and really infuses it with AI. In many ways, we talk about how Syntex can be perceived, at least with where we're at right now and where we're making investments. There's lots more to come that we'll be sharing with you later this year for sure. But a lot of what Syntex is right now is really providing AI models for SharePoint to automate the classification of content that you store in SharePoint and to extract information from it. And the way we often think about it, and when we talk with customers and what's resonated with them, is there's almost like these three ways that really where that extracted metadata can really help, is when you have these models that can automate that classification and extraction of information. It can really augment the search, because now you've got metadata and it's consistent and it's something that can augment your search. It can enhance business process automation by facilitating, when you're providing Power Automate flows, having consistent, reliable metadata to trigger those flows. And then, of course, we work very closely with the information governance group. And so we've worked very hard to provide integration with the compliance and Microsoft information protection labels so that you can, again, use this metadata and the content classification to drive consistency in how your content is being labeled for retention and sensitivity purposes. And again, as we think about what we were looking to do with Syntex, again, building on the content services capabilities that we provide in SharePoint, a lot of factors went into where we wanted to orient our efforts first. And a lot of it was really just looking at the landscape of content services and seeing opportunities where, frankly, SharePoint, as this really robust collaborative platform, could also be a place for transactional content management and to really start to consolidate other types of business content that organizations are producing and needing to store, manage, and retrieve. Content is being created at such an incredible pace that it's daunting and difficult, frankly, to have to rely on your users to constantly, when they put stuff into SharePoint, to make sure it's in the right location, that it's properly classified, that it's got all the right labels and metadata, that the right processes are implemented on those libraries to ensure that the business runs smoothly. And so the more that we can provide mechanisms to really facilitate that and AI models to automate that, then we believe that we can just improve the overall content services capabilities overall. And that data governance has become really important. In the last couple of years, we've made great strides there with the information protection work. And so we didn't want to undermine that. We wanted to accelerate and augment that. And so it was very important from the beginning that the work that we were doing took that into consideration. And so I'm excited to share an update actually about the data governance in particular. A lot of the customers that we've worked with, and certainly since launch, that have been starting to use Syntex in their own businesses, really see it as it kind of dovetails very nicely. For those of you who have been on this journey with us for a while, you know that we're part of the same group that also produced Viva Topics. And so when we were looking at these two products, we saw them as complementing one another around really employee experience and productivity. And that's where we see a lot of the Syntex work, is really turning your content into actionable knowledge and really providing efficiency and productivity savings for your employees. And that might be through, again, the things I mentioned about automating those tasks, automating the extraction of that metadata, and doing that across a whole variety of different business file types. And so a lot of the work that we've done and are continuing to do really focus around not only enhancing the models that we make available for you to that you can train to understand the different business file types, but also expanding what those models can extract and what different file types they understand. For example, one of the two model types, James will talk about one of them in a minute, is built natively in SharePoint. That's document understanding models. Those are great for Office file types and PDF. We have another model type that's very good for more structured files like web forms and invoices, things where you have very clear key value pair distinctions. And those models are best for scanned files, PDF and image files. But we are working with the team to enhance and expand that so that it can start to understand Office file types as well. So we'll continue to build out not only the capabilities that Syntex offers, but also just the smarts and the capabilities of the models that we currently provide. Now, this eye chart is, it is an eye chart, but it's intended to sort of illustrate just that there is quite a bit to Syntex in its current iteration. And as I've mentioned a couple times, it will continue to evolve both in the depth of the capabilities that are listed on this slide, as well as in the breadth in other content services areas that we're currently looking into and or already actively developing. But just to give you a quick snap of what you can take away from this, in addition to sort of that integration with information governance, we've also been doing a lot with, we own the taxonomy service, the managed metadata service. And so a lot of the work that we did here takes advantage of those existing product capabilities and investments. As many of you know, we've made investments in modernizing the managed metadata service the last 18 months. And a lot of that was in service for folks who currently use managed metadata, but also to enhance it for those Syntex users. And so we provide additional analytics. We provide the ability to enhance the content types and how the content types can be distributed and even enforced in site libraries across your tenant. And there's some great work that's coming out later this spring where we're finally going to fix the content type syndication problem and also make it much easier to discover not only content types in libraries, but also the right types of content types. And then finally, a lot of this is being done, as James will show in just a minute, with a new site template called the Content Center. And for those old SharePoint folks, you can think of this as sort of a very intelligent, modern document center. It is a place where we imagine for some companies might be a destination for managing your content, but for others, it becomes a watchtower, a sort of a tower control where you can build, train, and manage the models that you're distributing and making available across your tenant. And I mentioned the two different types of models. We're continuing to build on those, and we will also be expanding the portfolio to provide other types of models, some that require less training, they're already pre-built, and others that just build on these with additional capability. One thing I will point out, because it'll be relevant to some of the demos that both James and Bert are going to show, and some resources we'll share at the end of the hour, is we're also looking at making this Content Center site template available for non-licensed users. So again, because Syntex is an add-on, it's currently only available for trial or if you have licenses, if you buy licenses. But what we want to do is actually move the content center out from behind the license and make it available in the tenant provisioning service, the lookbook. And so that will give folks a longer time to evaluate it, see if the model capabilities are at a place where they're going to work for you. And then if it looks like it will, then you can move forward and add it to your tenant. But enough of this. Let's go and actually see what this stuff looks like. I'm going to turn the deck and the presentation over to James, who's going to demonstrate what some of this model technology looks like and how easy it is to build models. James?
Great, thanks, Sean. So let's go straight into demo. As Sean was describing, what I'm going to show now is how to build, publish, and publish a document understanding model. And document understanding models are really suited towards unstructured data. So in the example I'm going to share, I'm going to look at benefit change notices. Here's an example of the type of file that we're going to build a model to understand. You'll see it's unstructured. I can't say for the data I want to pull as metadata where that might appear in the document. It's just a block of text. So the exercise we're going to walk through now is how to use a small set of examples of this file type to build a model that will use AI to automatically extract key pieces of data. I'm going to begin in the content center, which is the new site template that Sean was just describing, and use the content center to build my document understanding model and then publish it to one or more SharePoint libraries. I'll talk about the UI way of publishing models in my section of the demo, and then we'll talk about some of the options over APIs and through PowerShell with Bert in a couple of minutes. So let me start off by creating a new document understanding model. I'll give it a name. And I'll quickly point out that we do have the opportunity to associate this either with a new content type, or if we have an existing content type we want to make more intelligent, we can take our document understanding model and snap it to an existing content type. We've also got the option here to associate a retention label with my model. So in this case, I'll grab the confidential label. So whenever a benefit change notice is processed by Syntex using this model, it not only will classify it and extract the metadata, it will stamp the confidential label on there as well to preserve the lifecycle of the file. When we're building a document understanding model, there are 4 steps that we walk through. So first we upload a training set of files. Then we build something called our classifier, and that's going to say when a file is executed against this model, is it a benefit change, yes or no? Or is it another file type, such as a contract or a statement of work? How can we make the determination whether it is or is not that file type? And then we have one or more extractors, and the extractors are what's going to take specific pieces of text, specific entities from that document, and promote them as metadata in my SharePoint library. And then finally, I publish the model. So I associate it with one or more SharePoint libraries or have multiple models running on a single library. Let's start off by adding our files. So I've got a small data set here. What's interesting with SharePoint Syntex, to contrast it with other similar technology that some of you might have worked with in the machine learning space, is that we only need a pretty small data set. So unlike machine learning, where you might be working with hundreds or thousands of with machine learning, where you might be looking at hundreds or thousands of labeled files. When we're working with, it's because I've got the file open, that'll be why. When we're working with SharePoint Syntex, we only need a small number of files, a minimum of 5. And what we're going to do through the process is less around getting AI to analyze the data set and find patterns. We're going to use this small data set to walk through an interactive training process. So the idea is that I, as an expert in this type of content, I'm going to use the model to impart my knowledge. I'm going to teach the AI, and the AI is then going to be able to understand the content going forwards. As a bare minimum, we need 5 files to teach a document understanding model as a mixture of positive examples and negative examples. In my case, I've got 14 files. So 12 examples of a benefit change and 2 statements of work to give the AI an example of something that isn't a benefit change. Now that I've got my data set, I'll move on to the classifier. And when we work with document understanding models, I really like to use the language of teaching. So imagine you're teaching a human being, and the same steps you'll go through are what we do when we're teaching the AI, when we're teaching Syntex how to build a model. So yeah, I've got pretty small children, so when I'm teaching them how to do things like recognize shapes or animals, first I'll show them examples, and then you'll explain the difference between them. So maybe if I'm teaching them the difference between a dog and a cat, my children are very small, so that's the level we're at. I'll show them some pictures of dogs, some pictures of cats so they can identify the difference. And then maybe I'll start to explain the difference. So dogs might tend to be bigger, or cats can climb trees and dogs can't. I'll point out the attributes of both to help them work out for themselves in the future. We're going to do exactly the same with Syntex. First, we're going to give examples. In this case, we're going to label some of the documents, and then we're going to explain how we came to that conclusion. We'll use what we call explanations to provide additional context. And Syntex will use a combination of those explanations and the labeling that I do to build the model. I'm looking at the labeling interface at the moment. On the left-hand side, you'll see the files that I have in my training set. And on the right-hand side, a preview pane of the file. Now, for the preview pane, we've hidden all of the rich text, all the rich formatting from the document. We're only interested in the text when we're training Syntex. So to make the training process easier, we've hidden out all that rich detail. I could hit the View Original button to get into that original version of the file at any time. But for now, we're only interested in the text. And it's a pretty simple step for labeling. I need to go through at least 5 of these files and say yes or no, whether or not it is an example of a benefit change. So I'll just grab 4 positives and 1 negative. Next is training. So again, I've given my examples. Now I need to show my thinking, show my working out. And the explanations are interesting. When I explain this to customers, oftentimes they get bogged down with other technologies they're used to and trying to apply some of those thinking patterns to Syntex. So they'll think of explanations as being regular expressions or different types of query statements. You're having to build rules that will say exactly where text appears within a document. And the reality of Syntex is that's not the case. What explanations are hints. They're suggestions of how the AI might identify documents or the attributes in them. Again, think about how you're teaching a person. You won't necessarily explain to a person how many characters into a document a particular phrase is. You'll tell them where you might identify a phrase or the type of language you'll see in a document that tells you that it's a benefit change or a contract and so on. So for this example, I can see I have a fairly consistent phrase of the language benefit change notice appears in my documents. So I'll create an explanation that's a phrase list showing that type of language. This isn't to say that that phrase has to appear in every document, but this is an example of the type of language that will indicate that it's a benefit change. And Syntex will use this explanation plus the labeling I did in the first step to help build the model. On the bottom, you can see for each of the files I've labeled, we've got the predicted label and an evaluation. So the evaluation is what the AI would do based on the instructions it's being given. So does it agree with me, yes or no, as the trainer? And you'll see we have 5 out of 5 matches. So for now, my model is 100% accurate. So for the classifier, the AI agrees with what I would do as a human expert. I can move to the testing stage and use the rest of my data set to do some more testing. Now, that was a pretty simple example. Let's move to an extractor to show you something a little bit more complex, like ramp up the complexity just a little bit. When I create extractors, they map to the columns which will exist on the SharePoint library that I publish to. So I can create many extractors. Each one will be a separate column. In this demo, I'll just create one for time, but you'll see some of the ideas here. So again, I can map this to either a new or an existing column. I can set what data type I'm going to be extracting from the particular file. In this case, let's grab the effective date of the contract change. And this might be useful once we extract the metadata for doing things like triggering some automation. So we might need to do notifications based on that date. We might want to sort or filter or build a view formatter on the library, which is using this date column to provide some improved navigation and readability. Again, we go through 2 steps. We label and then we explain. This time though, you'll see on the preview pane on the right, rather than label the entire document, I'm going to select the specific piece of text that I would expect to be extracted. In this case, the effective date. I'll label 4 positive examples and 1 negative example where we don't have an effective date. And move on to my training stage. Before I start to build some explanations, just notice on the right-hand side, we've still got a blue highlight on the preview. And that shows me what I labeled in the first step. As I start to layer on explanations, we'll also see a green highlight on the preview. And the green highlight shows what the AI would extract from this document. And we want to see the 2 things match up. We want my labeling and the AI's prediction to be exactly the same, showing that I've given enough explanations, I've given enough context to the AI to do a good job. Because we're dealing with a date, let's start with one of our template explanations. So this will grab a numeric date pattern match so that we know we're extracting a date. You'll see that's evaluating based on the instructions I've given in the bottom left. And what you might be surprised to see now is that we have 4 out of 5 mismatches. So given that I've added a date, you might be pretty surprised by that because there is a date in this file. I've told Syntex that it's looking for a date. So why hasn't it picked out this particular date? And this reinforces, hopefully, the idea that we're not building regular expressions or query statements. These are, in the same way that you teach a person, hints at how to find the right data. In this case, I've told Syntex that it's a date it's looking for, but there's no context here to say which date in this file am I looking for. How do I know this is the effective date rather than the date the document was written? So to do that, we apply additional explanations. What I'll do is, again, I'll use a template. And what we have as a recent release over the last couple of months is something called an automatic template. So this is where we can look at the training set that we've got and understand what are the common phrases that appear before or after the entities. I'll grab the before label, which will look across all my data in my training set and see what are the phrases that appear before the label in each of those files and build out an explanation list for me. I'll add that to my model. And we're closer. We're at 80% accuracy now. So 4 out of my 5 files have identified the correct entity. We've got the green and the blue highlights matching. If I look at my mismatch, though, what we can see is that it thinks there's an effective date in the statement of work. So we need to give additional cues, additional linguistic clues and hints to the AI in order for it to disambiguate. So again, we can add more explanations, either using the automatic phrase lists or manual phrase lists. So again, let me grab the automatic phrase list for the after label. We now have accuracy across all of my 5 test files. We expand out, look at the rest of the training set. And then finally, we can publish this to a SharePoint library. Now I'm going to cheat for time and go to an example that I created earlier on. So this is using the same test set, but I've created a number of more extractors here as well. Now, in order to manually publish this to a SharePoint library, I just select Apply Model, find the particular site that I want to publish to, and then publish to a specific document library. So in this case, benefit changes. Once I've done that, what's automatically happened here behind the scenes is we've created a few things. So we've created columns on the library based on the extractors that I have in the model. So in this case, for provider, for effective dates, discount and notice stressee, and so on. We've also created a new view for this document library. So we've changed the default view to be one based on benefit changes, the model that I've created, which shows all those columns as well as the content type, and the confidence score and classification date time, which are additional system columns we generate within SharePoint Syntex. Now, over the next couple of minutes, these files will process and we'll see the results from that. It generally takes between 2 and 10 minutes for content to be processed through SharePoint Syntex. I'll show you an example of one I made earlier. which shows all of the metadata that's been automatically extracted from each of those files, the confidence the Syntex had in extracting that, and the timestamp of when the extraction ran. Now, with that, I'm going to hand over to Bert to talk about how you can manage the life cycle of a model and the publishing of a model using PnP.
Thanks, James. Great demo. Really showed how you can build a model and how to configure it, how to tweak it, how to kind of start from scratch. Now, in my demo, I'm going to focus more on the automation parts. Imagine I have a model already and I want to automate. All right, good. Automation. Automation requires APIs. So this all starts with APIs, and the current APIs are SharePoint REST APIs. Here you see some examples that you can use to publish a model to a library. Documentation for these APIs is coming really soon, so we'll communicate about that once they are available, but they're almost ready, the documentation pages for these APIs. What we then did is we extended PnP Core SDK, our .NET open source SDK, to make it easier to use those APIs. So we have a typed model, which allows you to just work with syntax, get a model, apply a model to a library, process the content in the library, and so on. All these things can be done using .NET code. But if you prefer the APIs, once the documentation is there, you can just do this in any language that you want, obviously. And then what I will show in a demo today is more focused on PnP PowerShell, the DevOps scenario. What if I'm an admin in an organization? I have some models that are prepped by folks in my organization, and I want to roll them out across thousands of sites, 10,000 of libraries. How do I do that? How can I automate things? That's been shown in this demo. So what will be the flow that I will show in the demo? We'll start from a GitHub sample repo that will be available soon. We target end of this week, which contains sample files, which are PnP templates that you can then install in your content center. So since the model, the content understanding model, is just a PnP template, you can just call invoke PnP site template and boom, it's being added to your content center. It has to be a content center site. Obviously, you can't add this to somewhere else. But once you do that, you have it in the content center. And since we bring not just the model, but also the training data, everything is there. So you already see how the model is trained. And then you can play around with it and learn and refine and make it better, add some things. You make it your own model. Once you're ready, you can then deploy the model. What James did in the demo was picking a site, picking a library, saying like, model apply to this library. Well, you can also do this using PowerShell, using the publish PnP syntax model commandlet, which then gets the model applied to a library. And finally, there is, once you kind of fully done, your model is being evaluated by users, everyone's happy about it, you want to apply the model on the existing content, and then you can use the regressed PnP syntax classify and extract commandlet, which will take existing files in the library where you applied the model to and process those files using the AI system. So by default, if you add a model to a library, only the newly added files to the library are processed, not what was already inside the library. And with this commandlet, you can actually just push all the content of the library through the model. Now, with that, let's move to demo. So first of all, here is an empty content center. Plain empty, just refresh, nothing in there, brand newly created content center. So what I'm first going to do is use one of the samples, and this is a preview of the syntax sample repo. As I said, we'll launch it probably this week, that's the plan, and it has samples. With, for example, I'm going to use the contract notice sample, which is a PnP file. So imagine this PnP file already being available in your system. You can then do it like this. Let's go over here. So here you see the same PnP file. So I'm going to install this model to my content center site. So first step is connecting to my content center site. Should do like this. and I'm going to authenticate with my demo account. That should go fairly quick, and we're in. Next step is applying the PnP package, the site template, to the content center site using the invoke PnP site template commandlet. This will add the model file, the classifier, and also all the training data. So you get all these documents as part of this package, and both will be added to the correct location. So this takes a couple of seconds to add. Yeah, let's go already over here. Maybe you can already see some content coming up. Training files. So you see we have a folder per model by default, and then in here you see the training files coming up. Almost ready. You see more files popping in. So once these files are there, then we can have a look at the model. Actually, I can already go to the model right now. So here you see the model that was added. If I open up the model, I get my first start experience. I'm going to click that away. But here you see already like a model with training data, fully trained as well, 100% trained. We have the extractors, like if you take an extractor, I can see the highlights that happened and so on. So everything is there, like you would have built this up manually from the get-go. So you have a fully prepped and trained model that you can then use to further refine. Now, the scope of this demo is more around showing how to automate things. So let me go back to PowerShell and let's just do this. Let's have a look at our currently available models in our content center. And this one does list our contract notice model that we just added. So that's great, that's correct. Now in the next step, I'm going to deploy this model. So here I have a demo site with a document library containing some contract notices, some documents, plain vanilla, just a standard document library where I just dropped some documents in. Okay, now what happens if I add this model to this library? I'm going to copy, write syntax just to not make any typos. So the commandlet to use is publish-PnP syntax model. There's also an unpublish, by the way. So publish will deploy the model to a library. The model is a contract notice. You can specify it by name or by ID or by a pipe in PowerShell to this particular site and this particular library. Hit enter, and then the model will be applied to the library. This also works in batch, by the way. So this is like an interactive one, but you can also create a batch using a new PnP batch, and then you do publish PnP syntax model for like one model to 10 libraries, 100 libraries, 1000 libraries. They all are batched together and send as one batch to the server to process them at once, which will give you a performance improvement versus doing this one by one. Return code is 201, meaning success. So going back to our library, let's refresh. And let's have a look at our view list. And we see here that there now is like a contract notice view. This was added by applying the model. I didn't choose to make this a default view, but you can also using the API say this will be the default view, and then it will change to this contract notice by default. You see the new columns. You don't see things being populated, which is expected because we don't process existing content. But if I add new content in here, which I have open over here, let's drag in some additional files. These files will be processed automatically. Obviously, this is an async process, so it happens in the background, as James mentioned, 2 to 10 minutes. So it's not immediately popping up, but let's see what happens during the demo. But these get processed. The other ones, which were there, are not getting processed by default. So to process those, we need to do something more. Going back to PowerShell, before we go to the processing of the existing files, let's just do this get PnP syntax model publication commandlet as a way for you to see where is this model published. So this will give you like a list of all the libraries, all the sites and libraries with this where this model is published. Now I'm going to switch to my demo site. So today as of now, I was in the demo content center site. So connected to the content center. So if you work with models, you do it from the content center. If you work with content, you do it from the actual site. So now I switch to my Syntex May 21 demo site. And I'm going to actually process all the content in the contract notice library. So this commandlet request -PnP Syntex classify and extract will take all the documents, and if they're not yet processed by Syntex, it will process them. You can also use -force, where you can say, I want to reprocess everything in the library. So this is a way for you to backfill the columns for existing content once you apply a model to an existing library. And again, this goes quite fast. It will just queue up the request for the server to handle. You see there's a ton of documents being processed over here. And once this gets running, you will see metadata popping in here. Let me refresh this, see if there's already something. And yes, you see things are popping in. So the model is the model extraction is working and applying metadata for my document into my columns. Okay. One final thing to conclude the demo is the PnP Core SDK support. Demo focused on PnP PowerShell, but PnP PowerShell uses PnP Core SDK as the way to do things. And in here we have an article around SharePoint Syntex, which shows you how to connect to a content center site, how to list available models, how to publish a model to a library. And there's like 4 options to do that: in batch, without batch, different APIs to make it easier for you depending on how you use PnP Core SDK. But overall, plenty of options to publish a model, to unpublish a model, to list where a model was published, and then to classify the existing content, either individual files or like classify a full library of files. So you have all these options available in PnP Core SDK. And these use those REST APIs that we'll document really soon as well. So all supported, all for you to use. With that, I think Sean, James, and Vesa, I can wrap up this demo.
Well, before, don't stop sharing. I will ask this from Sean. So Sean, just a positioning perspective. So SharePoint Syntex is not for a small companies, but what is really the sweet spot of SharePoint Syntex? Can we kind of go back on basics and kind of talk about that one slightly, a few minutes?
Sure. I don't know if it's so much that it's not for small businesses. I think it's more going to be dictated by the use case and the content. You know, I mean, if you're a small 5-person accounting firm, but you're processing lots of documents and you don't want to do that work manually, there's a need for Syntex that I could see being fulfilled there.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be more around the content and the use case. We see it as, you know, something where we also know that certainly customers we've talked to and folks in our preview program have also shared that they often have to rely on different products to, you know, perform some of these same functions. And so I won't, you know, shy away from the fact that part of the reason why we're doing this is because we see an opportunity to, you know, make it easier for folks, you know, you're already storing a lot of your content at M365 and on the SharePoint stack. Let's make it easier for you to do those things without having to rely on a bunch of other tools to do pre or post content processing. So that's a driver there as well. And certainly an aspect of the product development that dictates what we're looking at and what we're, you know, investing in terms of building out the product.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it fair to then say that what you were saying, actually, that's a good point, that it's really about the volume of the documents and forms and what is actually being processed. And the whole point of here is that, well, somebody might be saying, again, not a licensed product and all of that, but the whole point of this licensing is that it's going to be cheaper for you to use the machine learning rather than somebody manually setting up the metadata. And if that's not the case, don't buy the license, of course. But of course, there's a analysis to be done that how much work is needed for somebody manually to set those that metadata. Is that the right
Absolutely.
way of approaching?
Yeah, that's a great way of summarizing it, basically. Yeah, for sure. And in fact, I would also add that notion of content volume also highlights where, I've answered a few questions that yes, the licensing currently is $5 per person per month. Most of SharePoint is per person licensing, but we recognize, as I'm sure some of you do as well, as as we've gone through this, you're like, well, wait a minute, how does that match with a small company that's processing 100,000 documents a month versus maybe a large company that's processing 100 documents a month? The user equation the math doesn't work out. And so one of the things that we are looking at is, how to accommodate based on consumption and volume, because we think that that's going to be a more important factor than, the 1 or 100 people that are using the product. And so we're getting that feedback from folks like you. So please keep it coming, and the use cases and how you see using this, that will help us make sure that we're building the product and pricing it properly for you and your needs. So
absolutely. That's actually a good way of actually saying that as well. Just to recap for everybody, it's not like the licensing is there, but we want that license to be fair, that it makes sense for our customers as well. And that's the most important thing, is to people to then give us feedback related on all of the costs and structures and model what we have, and then functionalities what we have, so that we can provide additional value for our customers, because everything what we do is for our customers. So
yes, absolutely. And just because I know this comes up, so let me just use this as an opportunity to also highlight that, because the question, what James and Bert demonstrated this morning is doc understanding models that are trained, built, and used in SharePoint. Those are a part of that included license cost. With form processing, we integrate with AI Builder, which is a new service on the Power Platform, and that uses Power Platform credits. So if you don't already have Power Platform credits, you will either need to purchase those, or if you have at least 300 Syntex licenses, you automatically get a million service credits renewable each month. So there's more of that on the licensing detail page, but that question comes up. Just wanted to call attention to that.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, James. And then Bert as well. Really, really cool demos and good recap on what SharePoint Syntex is all about, what's actually happening, what's the latest. But let's actually close up. The recording will be available in 24 hours in Microsoft 365 Community YouTube channel. So again, as M365 PnP Dash videos. And the next M365 General Community call is in this week on Thursday. The next Microsoft Teams Community call is on week from now, Tuesday. The next SharePoint Framework Community call 2 weeks from now on Thursday, and the next SharePoint monthly call is on June 8th. A lot of community calls, a lot of cool demos. Everything is getting recorded. We will share the recordings, of course, in YouTube and in social media as well. And there's a lot of other community calls available. You choose which of these you want to attend, what is meaningful for you, and then check out the recordings if needed later. But that's it from our side. So thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for the great interactive discussion in the chat as well. And let's definitely stay in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Vesa.